She stood alone at the edge of the glittering ballroom, invisible. Her husband of 3 years, Damien Ashworth, the Duke of Ashworth, stood only a few feet away. And yet, he had not looked at her once all evening. He was looking at someone else. Lady Delphine Wrexham, the widowed Countess of Halston, had returned to London society that season. She was everything Juliana was not: golden-haired, dazzling, the woman who had once worn Damien's ring and broken his heart. The woman who, everyone whispered, still owned whatever was left of it. Juliana's gloved fingers tightened around her champagne glass as she watched Damien lean down to hear something Delphine said. And then, for the first time since Juliana had met him, he smiled. It was not the polite, distant smile he offered at dinner parties. It was a real smile, one that softened the hard lines of his face and made him look almost tender, almost human. Juliana's heart cracked open, a silent, invisible wound no one in that bright room could see. She pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to steady her breathing. She had spent 3 years trying to coax even a flicker of warmth from this man. She had failed, but Delphine had returned, and he was smiling as if no time had passed at all. The whispers around her grew sharper. Poor Duchess, he hasn't danced with her once since the wedding. They say he still keeps a portrait of Lady Delphine in his study. She looks so plain beside him, doesn't she? No wonder he never. Juliana turned away before the sting could turn into visible tears. She navigated through clusters of silk and jewels, keeping her expression perfectly still. 3 years of marriage to a cold duke had taught her one valuable skill: how to pretend her heart was not breaking. She reached the terrace doors and slipped outside into the cool night air. The music softened behind her. She gripped the stone balustrade and closed her eyes, letting the silence wash over her. A quiet voice broke through her solitude. "The stars are kinder company tonight, are they not?" Juliana startled and turned. A gentleman stood a few paces away, half hidden in shadow. He was not a man she recognized, plainly dressed, with kind eyes and a physician's bag at his side. He must have been called to attend a guest. "I beg your pardon," he said gently. "I did not mean to intrude, but you looked as though you needed a moment of peace." Juliana managed a small, tired smile. "It seems I am not very good at hiding it." "That is not a fault," he replied simply. "Some truths are meant to be felt." She did not know his name then. Later, she would learn it was Dr. Nathaniel Gray, and he would become one of the truest friends she had ever known. But that night, she only nodded and walked back inside, gathering the last shreds of her dignity. When the ball ended, she climbed into her carriage alone. Damien remained behind, no doubt to escort Lady Delphine home. As the carriage rolled into the darkness, Juliana pressed her forehead to the cold glass and let a single tear fall. She had waited for love for 3 long years. And somewhere in that silence, something inside her finally began to shift. 3 years earlier, Juliana Vance had stood in her father's crumbling study, her hands folded tightly in her lap, while he delivered the news that would change her life. "The Duke of Ashworth has offered for you," Baron Vance said, his voice heavy with relief. "He will clear our debts. He will restore our name. You will be a duchess." Juliana remembered blinking, struggling to understand. The Duke of Ashworth was a figure of cold, untouchable power. Handsome as a winter storm, with dark hair and silver-gray eyes that never seemed to see anyone. He had been betrothed once to the beautiful Lady Delphine, but she had broken the engagement to marry a wealthier earl. Since then, the Duke had become even more distant, a man of duty, not passion. "Why me?" Juliana had whispered. Her father had looked away. "He has his reasons." She met Damien for the first time in his London residence. He stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the gray light, and he did not smile. He did not even pretend. "This is a union of convenience," he said, his voice calm and final. "You will have my title, my protection, and every comfort. I will ask nothing of you except that you uphold the dignity of the Ashworth name. I do not expect affection. I do not offer it." Juliana had nodded, her heart sinking and yet clinging to a fragile thread of hope. Perhaps, with time, his heart might thaw. She had heard tales of cold men who learned to love. She would be patient. She would be kind. On their wedding day, he stood beside her at the altar like a marble statue. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, his lips brushed her cheek so briefly she might have imagined it. He did not look at her as they walked back down the aisle. That night he escorted her to a beautifully appointed chamber and left her there alone. No words of comfort, no gentle touch, just the soft click of the door closing. Juliana sat on the edge of her vast, empty bed, still in her wedding gown, and wept until her chest ached. Still, she rose the next morning with determination. She would learn his ways. She would make him see her. She memorized his preferences: black coffee in the morning, silence at breakfast, the North Library for his evening reading. She arranged fresh flowers in every room he frequented. She wore the colors he seemed to favor. She spoke softly, never complained, never demanded. Weeks passed, then months. His coldness did not thaw. He was never unkind in the way of shouting or cruelty. His neglect was far more painful than that. It was the empty chair across the dinner table, the conversations that never ventured deeper than the weather, the way his gaze passed over her as if she were part of the wallpaper. One afternoon, passing by the servants' hall, she overheard two maids whispering. "Still carries that miniature of Lady Delphine, they say. He looks at it every night. Poor her Grace, married to a ghost." Juliana stood frozen in the corridor, her heart splintering further. She had married a man whose heart belonged to another, and that other had now returned to London, beautiful and newly free. That night she gathered her courage and knocked on his study door. "Your Grace," she began softly, "I wondered if we might dine together tonight. I thought perhaps we could speak. I feel we are strangers living under the same roof." Damien did not look up from his papers. "I have work. Another time, perhaps." Another time never came. Something inside Juliana broke that night. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was a quiet, internal surrender. She stopped waiting by the window for his carriage. She stopped ordering his favorite dishes. She stopped hopping. And for the first time, she began to think about who she could become. Not as his wife, but as herself. The Ashworth estate was vast, stretching across rolling green hills and ancient woodlands. Juliana began to spend her days outside the manor walls. She visited the tenants' cottages on the eastern edge of the property and was shocked by what she found. Roofs leaked, children were thin, illness festered in damp rooms with no firewood. The previous Duchess had died long ago, and the Duke had been too consumed by his own bitterness to notice. Juliana, with a quiet resolve, took a portion of her personal allowance and began to make changes. She ordered repairs. She organized food deliveries. She sat with sick children and read to them. Word spread through the village of the young Duchess, who appeared not with demands but with baskets. It was during these visits that she met Dr. Nathaniel Gray again. He was the local physician, a man of gentle humor and steady hands. He had no title and no fortune, but he had a gift for easing suffering. "Your Grace," he said one afternoon, wiping his hands after bandaging a farmer's leg, "you are unlike any aristocrat I have ever met." Juliana smiled, genuinely this time. "I merely wish to be useful." "Usefulness is a rare virtue in these parts," he replied. "You have a gift for kindness." Their friendship grew naturally, rooted in shared purpose. Nathaniel never flattered, never presumed. He simply saw her, not as a duchess or a neglected wife, but as a capable, intelligent woman. It was a feeling Juliana had nearly forgotten. One evening, the village held a harvest festival. Juliana helped organize the festivities: garlands of autumn leaves, tables laden with cider and pies, a space cleared for dancing. She did not expect Damien to attend. He rarely appeared at such local affairs, but she threw herself into the joy of it nonetheless. When the fiddler struck up a lively tune, Nathaniel offered her his hand. "Your Grace, would you do me the honor?" Juliana hesitated, but there was no one watching who mattered, no cold husband to disapprove. She placed her hand in his and let herself be spun into the dance. They laughed, they twirled under the strings of lantern light. For a few precious minutes Juliana felt light, she felt seen. And then from the edge of the crowd she felt a different gaze, one that froze the laughter in her throat. Damien stood there, half hidden in shadow, his eyes fixed on her. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. He did not approach. He simply turned and strode away into the darkness. That night when Juliana returned to Ashworth Hall, Damien was waiting in the grand foyer. The candles flickered. The silence was heavy. "You dance with a physician," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Juliana met his eyes without flinching. "I danced with a friend. Since my husband does not wish to dance with me, I saw no harm in accepting another's kindness." Something flickered across his face. Shock, perhaps, or indignation. He had never heard her speak so directly. "You are a duchess," he said, his tone hardening. "Not a village maid. Your behavior reflects on this house." "This house," she replied softly, "has not felt like my home for a long time. I am merely trying to survive within it." She curtsied, polite but distant, and walked past him up the stairs. She did not look back. She did not see Damien stand motionless for a long, long time afterward. She did not see the first crack that formed in the ice around his heart. Lady Delphine's return to society was like the strike of a match on dry tinder. Every ball she attended, Damien was there. Every dinner party, his seat was beside hers. The tongue whispered with barely concealed delight. The Duke and the Countess, reunited at last. What must the poor Duchess think? Juliana knew exactly what she thought. She thought of the morning she had walked past Damien's study and seen, through the half-open door, Delphine seated on the settee, leaning close, her hand resting on his sleeve. He had not pulled away. That image seared itself into her mind. At a garden party a week later, Juliana stood near a rose trellis, sipping tea, when Delphine glided toward her like a cat approaching a cornered bird. "Your Grace," Delphine purred. "How brave you are to face the world with such composure. It must be exhausting pretending you don't know." Juliana's teacup did not tremble. "I beg your pardon." Delphine's smile was honey laced with venom. "Oh, my dear, surely you know why Damien married you. It wasn't for love, it wasn't even for duty, it was guilt." Juliana's blood turned cold. "Your family's ruin," Delphine continued, her voice low and intimate. "The disgrace of your father, it wasn't an accident. It was the result of an investigation Damien himself conducted years ago. He uncovered a smuggling ring tied to powerful families, and your poor, stupid father was caught in the net. Damien cleared his name in the end, but the damage was done. Your family was ruined. And so, noble, guilty Damien married you to atone for it." The words landed like blows. Juliana could not breathe. She could not think. Delphine tilted her head, her eyes gleaming. "You were never his choice. You were his penance. And now that I am free, perhaps his debt is paid." She drifted away, leaving Juliana rooted to the spot, the world spinning. That night Juliana did not sleep. She sat in the darkness of her chamber, replaying every cold moment of her marriage through this new, terrible lens. He had not married her out of obligation to the Vance name. He had married her because he was responsible for its destruction. She was not a wife. She was a living reminder of his sin. A week later, Juliana made a discovery that would shatter the last of her hope. While organizing donations for the tenants, she had traveled to the far edge of the estate, where an old cottage sat half hidden by overgrown hedges. She had heard rumors that an elderly woman lived there, reclusive and forgotten. Out of compassion, she decided to pay a visit. The woman who opened the door was frail, her hands trembling, her face lined with years of sorrow. But her eyes were the same silver gray as Damien's. "You're her," the old woman whispered, "the new Duchess." Juliana's heart lurched. "And you are?" "I am Helena Ashworth, the Dowager Duchess, Damien's mother." Juliana stood frozen. No one ever spoke of the Dowager Duchess. It was as if she had been erased from history. But here she was, living in poverty and illness on her own son's estate. The old woman began to weep. "I did not abandon him because I did not love him. His father, my husband, was a monster. He was violent. He kept me prisoner in this house. When I finally escaped, I had to leave Damien behind. He was only 8 years old. I thought I would come back for him, but his father told him terrible lies. He grew up believing I had abandoned him for another man." Juliana listened, her heart breaking anew. She sat beside the woman and held her hand. "He never let me explain," Helena continued, her voice cracking. "He wrote me letters as a boy, begging me to return, but his father burned them before I could read them. By the time I was able to reach him, he was a man grown and he refused to see me. He hates me." Juliana gently wiped the old woman's tears. "I will speak to him." Helena shook her head. "He will never forgive me." "Then I will be your companion until he does." For the next several weeks, Juliana visited the cottage in secret. She brought medicine, food, and firewood. She read to Helena and listened to her stories. She learned that the late Duke's cruelty had scarred Damien more deeply than anyone knew. His coldness was not indifference. It was a fortress built by a boy who had been taught that love was a weapon. One evening, as Juliana returned home, she found Damien standing in the foyer. His face was pale with fury. "You've been visiting her," he said, his voice shaking. "How dare you, after everything she did?" Juliana did not retreat. "She did not abandon you. She was running from a man who would have destroyed her. She has spent her life grieving for the son she lost." "You know nothing," Damien snarled. "I know you are still that 8-year-old boy waiting for a mother who never came back," Juliana said softly. "But she is here now, and she is dying. If you do not go to her, you will regret it for the rest of your life." He stared at her as if she had struck him. Then he turned and stormed away. Juliana did not follow him, but later that night she saw a light in the distant cottage window, and she knew he had gone. When he returned, hours later, she found him in the library, slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders trembled. She had never seen him so undone. Without a word, Juliana knelt beside him and placed a gentle hand on his arm. He did not push her away. "She told me everything," he said hoarsely. "The beatings, the locked doors, she didn't leave me. She was forced out." Juliana said nothing. She simply stayed with him, a steady presence in his grief. That night something shifted between them, a fragile bridge built across years of coldness. Damien began to look at Juliana with something other than indifference. He noticed the way she moved through the estate, no longer a lonely, hopping bride, but a woman with purpose. Tenants greeted her with genuine affection. Dr. Gray still visited often, and Damien found himself bristling at the easy warmth between them. At dinner one evening, he set down his fork and said without warning, "You've changed." Juliana looked up. "Have I? You used to ask me questions, seek my company. Now you are always occupied." She smiled faintly. "You made it clear you did not want my company. I simply found other ways to fill my time." He flinched ever so slightly. "And Dr. Gray assists you in that filling of time." Juliana's gaze was steady. "Dr. Gray is a friend. He treats the tenants without charge. He is a good man, nothing more." "I don't like the way he looks at you." A flicker of anger rose in her chest. "And how is that?" "As if you are something precious," Damien said quietly. The words hung between them, unexpected and raw. Juliana's voice was soft. "It has been a long time since anyone looked at me that way, especially you." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The silence was filled with the weight of unspoken things. The fragile peace did not last. Lady Delphine, sensing Damien slipping from her grasp, grew desperate. She invited Juliana to tea under the pretense of friendship, and there, in a sunlit parlor full of roses, she dealt the killing blow. She handed Juliana a yellowed newspaper clipping, dated 7 years earlier. It detailed the smuggling scandal that had ruined Baron Vance, and the byline of the investigation read, "Conducted under the authority of Lord Damien Ashworth, Duke of Ashworth." "He never told you, did he?" Delphine said sweetly. "He married you because he couldn't bear the guilt. You are not his duchess. You are his act of contrition, and I am the woman he truly loves. I always have been." Juliana left the house in a daze. The clipping burned in her hand. She went straight to Damien's study. When he looked up and saw her expression, the color drained from his face. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Was my father's ruin your doing?" He stood slowly, as if the air had turned to water. "Juliana, answer me." He swallowed. "Yes, I led the investigation. Your father was wrongly implicated. I cleared his name, but the damage was done. I could not undo it. And so I offered for your hand to restore what I had taken." Juliana felt the ground fall away beneath her feet. "You married me out of guilt." "At first, yes," he said, his voice cracking, "but it is not the reason I—" She held up her hand to stop him. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I spent 3 years believing I was simply not enough, that if I tried harder, loved you more, you would eventually see me. But you never could because I was never a wife to you. I was a debt to be paid." "Juliana, please." "No," her voice was quiet but firm. "I cannot stay here. I cannot be your penance any longer." She turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and into a carriage that would take her to her family's small dower house on the edge of the county. She did not look back. Damien stood alone in his study, the silence roaring in his ears. The emptiness of the house pressed in on him, suffocating. He had lost her, the one person who had ever truly seen him, who had reached through his ice and touched his wounded heart, and he had driven her away with his pride and his secrets. He thought of her laughter at the harvest festival, her gentle hands tending to his mother, her steady gaze when she told him he was still that 8-year-old boy. He thought of the way she had knelt beside him and held him as he wept. And he knew, with a certainty that shattered him, that he loved her. He had loved her for a long time. He had simply been too broken, too afraid to admit it. He rode to the dower house at dawn. Juliana was sitting in the small, overgrown garden when he arrived. She looked up, weary and pale, her eyes red from weeping. He dismounted and walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. He did not stop until he was standing before her. And then, in front of the birdsong and the morning light, the Duke of Ashworth fell to his knees. "I was a coward," he said, his voice raw. "I used guilt as a shield because I did not know how to be vulnerable. After Delphine abandoned me after my mother's lies, I swore I would never let anyone close again. But you crept in anyway. You healed my mother. You healed my tenants. You healed me, and I was too blind to see it." Juliana's lips trembled. "I wanted so badly to matter to you." "You do," he said, tears sliding down his face. "You are the beating heart of my life, and I nearly let you slip away. I love you, Juliana, not out of guilt, not out of obligation. I love you for the woman you are, and I will spend every day proving it if you will let me." She looked at him, the proud, powerful Duke, weeping at her feet, and somewhere inside her the knot of pain began to loosen. "I am with child," she whispered. He went still, the world stopped. "I have not told you because I feared you would only see the child as an heir," she continued, her voice breaking, "not as something born from love." Damien reached out and took her hands, pressing them to his lips. "A child, our child." His voice was thick with wonder and regret. "I do not deserve this. I do not deserve you." Juliana looked at his bowed head and felt the last of her bitterness dissolve. She had spent years seeking his love, and now he was offering it freely, brokenly, and she found she could still accept it. "I am not saying yes," she said softly. "Not yet. I need time to heal, to learn to trust you again." He nodded, not releasing her hands. "I will wait, however long it takes. I will earn you back." In the weeks that followed, Damien Ashworth became a different man. He visited his mother every day, sitting with her, holding her hand, listening to her stories. He threw himself into the estate's repair alongside Juliana, working beside the tenants with his own hands. And slowly, tentatively, he courted his wife as if she were a debutante he was desperate to win. He brought her flowers from the garden. He read to her in the evenings. He asked her opinions and truly listened. And when Dr. Gray came to check on the tenants, Damien shook his hand and thanked him for his friendship to the Duchess, with no trace of jealousy, only gratitude. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted past the window, Juliana sat beside Damien in the library, her head resting against his shoulder. The child grew within her, a steady reminder of new beginnings. "I was so afraid," she murmured, "afraid I would never be enough." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You were always more than enough. I was simply too broken to see it." She smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes. "We were both broken, but perhaps we can heal together." He lifted her hand and pressed it over his heart. "Together," he vowed, "always." And in the quiet of Ashworth Hall, where once only silence and loneliness dwelled, love finally took root and bloomed. They named their daughter Hope, and she was born in the spring.